Y'all, Wizard101 is about to put out a gigantic update. It's about to absolutely change many parts of the game, especially PvP. We need to talk about this because even your boy couldn't have seen this coming. They put out the patch notes. Big news of the day. Gonna put this right in front of the video. They are nerfing drains finally in PvP. If y'all don't know, this is pre-change, right? So like, you know, tomorrow, hopefully this will not be the case. If y'all don't know, Death is a school that is balanced around having around 85 damage per pip. That's why they give them things like 12,500 HP, 77 resist maximum, over 200 damage allowed as their damage cap. But for the past, I don't know, 10 years, this spell, along with every other drain in the game, has completely taken that rule and said, I don't think so. Now, am I saying that all drains should have never existed and that Death shouldn't have been a drain school all along? Not at all. I'm just saying that this was too powerful, especially in a competitive format like PvP. Anyone that's actually fought this school will say that I'm right. They'll agree. But basically what they're doing just in PvP, this is a whole new mechanic that we've never seen before. They're gonna make it so that every spell that's a drain is essentially nerfed by 25% as soon as you enter a sigil in the arena. So outside of PvP, outside of the arena, this card will do 575. The second you queue into a game and you're a Death Wizard that has these in side deck, this should do closer to 430 damage. Now, where are they getting this 25% decrease? Might be a question that you're asking. Basically, right, a 25% decrease is the same as, you know, making something 3/4 as good as it used to be. And if you take the 113 damage per pip that this spell does and multiply it by those 3/4, you get about the 85 damage per pip that all of these stats are balanced around. I can only assume that this will apply to drains that do other things like vampire, drains that, you know, give you 55 blades like ghoul. This was a much needed nerf, y'all. I didn't think this would happen this update. Like, big props. I don't know if they I don't know, hastened the timeline, because I didn't expect this. I don't think anyone really was. But the fact that this was a priority alone means that at least after all this time, they've actually addressed one of the core complaints that people have had about PvP for the past many months. I cannot stress this enough. This one change will actually make PvP way more playable for a bunch of schools, including every school that's offensive and has been unable to trade with one card, which is Wraith. Now, to my astonishment, they actually managed to nerf Death twice in one update. Now, this one, I'm gonna push back. I'm not really sure it's gonna be much of a nerf, but in the patch notes, they're saying that they're gonna be banning TC versions of 3 cards: Black Widow, Poison, and Frostbite. What do all of these spells have in common? They're spells that give overtime identity to schools that ideally should be weak against shields. That's kind of the way they've been going about it. Right, when you think of schools that are weak against shields, another school that might come to mind is Storm, right? Storm is one of those schools where if you shield a lot, it's gonna counter them, as it should. Over the many years that they've been balancing the game, I would argue that Ice and also Death are also schools that fall under that, at least at some level. And the ease at which they could basically just pack a bunch of, like, you know, overtimes and side deck and punish shields, it's basically just said no to that. Now, keep in mind, just because something's banned in TC does not mean that this affects PvE at all. 1, 2, it also doesn't stop you from putting a bunch of poisons in main deck or a bunch of frostbites in main deck, especially considering that the damage difference between a main deck and a side deck poison and a main deck and a side deck frostbite aren't really that crazy. This isn't really going to affect all that much either. There will be one matchup that gets super affected by this, and that's because Black Widow doesn't exist in main deck. So any school that's really good at managing your pips will be harder to fight as a Death. The big school in question there is Balance. Before, it was as simple as Black Widowing, right, breaking shields and then doing 113 damage per pip hit against Balance without even worrying about the overtime counters that Balance has, right? Gearhead shifts overtime. But now, not only do you have to do a more powerful overtime and take more damage from a Gearhead if a spell like this gets shifted over to you, your follow-up will be doing the same damage per pip as any other Death spell instead of healing you while hitting like a fire spell. Death nerfs have been needed for probably the past 4 years. By the way, fun fact, I did look. In the past many years, the only other TC that has ever been banned from Death PvP was Dr. Von, and that was still in the years ago region. Poison being banned is going to be one of the actual things that you can say that has been a targeted nerf to a school as OP as Death in years. I hope that this makes PvP better, especially for all the matchups that Death has just been winning without actually playing better. I'm a little bit torn on Frostbite. I'm gonna keep it real. I don't think this is a nerf to overtimes on Ice or Death. I think packing Frostbite on main deck is just going to mean that you're going to move some things to side deck. Anytime there's like, you know, one of these spells that are main deck and they do stuff like counter blades, like you could just make TCs of them and put them in side deck and replace them with the overtimes that you can no longer put inside deck. So instead of Scarecrows in main deck, I can just put Poisons in main deck and Scarecrows in side deck. It would barely change the way my deck worked, and it would still be pretty easy to break shields no matter what. So I don't really see this being a crazy change. It's not like they can't overtime anymore. So I don't think it's anything to really worry about if this was a concern for people. Now, the final part of the update is, in my opinion, also extremely overdue, but I'm happy to see it. Now, this one's really interesting. It looks like they're making every single counter in the game, whether it's to blades, weaknesses, shields, traps, they're making all of them just a little bit better. And I think the idea behind it is to basically correlate more with the pip cost of the spell. Now, I just yapped right there, but basically, I think based on what the patch notes are saying, let's say that you have like a 7 pip spell that counters 5 blades, right? 5 blades is the most any spell counters, regardless of whether it's 8 pips, 7 pips. That's just where we're at right now. Instead of doing what it does now, I think what they've basically made it is they've taken the pip cost, lowered it by 1, and that's how many things it can counter. So as an example, they said that Skeletal Dragon will be able to counter 7 blades against your opponent. I assume Scarecrow will be able to counter 6. They put out a whole list of spells that are affected by this. Now, what I think will happen is, especially in the case of like really powerful utilities like 45 blades, what I'm going to assume is that these spells are going to counter more things, but the actual hanging effect that they give you are going to be more about the number of hanging effects than the value of them alone. So I don't think you're going to be Skeletal Dragoning a single blade to get a 45 blade. Like, I don't think that's really going to happen. I think you're going to use this to get a bunch of blades when your opponent also blades a lot while doing damage. But this will be affecting weakness counters. This will be affecting trap counters and blade counters. Much like how Minotaur is a 5-pip spell that counters 4 shields, and Elephant is a 6-pip spell that counters 5 shields. We're going to have like trap counters at 10 pips. Arguably, I think this one would counter 9 traps, right? I think that's going to be a big difference. It should be able to actually keep up with someone just spamming buffs inside deck, which has also been historically a gigantic issue in Wiz. I want to say that the thing to watch out for especially will be how good blade counters actually get, because I would argue that that being capped at being able to only remove 5 blades has been a real issue, and that's mainly because, right, of the fact that for 1 pip you can triple blade, and there are many schools, not just like 1 or 2, there are many schools depending on which blade that you use that can basically make it so that if they use a certain blade and cover it with a triple blade, even a spell that removes 5 blades will only actually remove 1 buff, right? For example, the Star Blade, right? It puts the Life Blade on you first, so if a Life Wizard were to use a Star Blade and cover it with any sort of triple blade, right now, in Live Realm, even if I used a Scarecrow, I'm only removing 1 life blade from that person after they've literally spent 2 rounds getting 6 blades on themselves. That trade-off alone was some hot garbage, so hopefully now it's going to be probably almost impossible to trap spam because Sun Serpent's just crazy. And even if you do blade spam, I'm going to assume that now the counters can somewhat keep up, and you'll have time to actually use the things that they create for yourself as well, right? Like, you know, if you were to Scarecrow and get a bunch of weaknesses on your opponent, I might actually have the window now to think about what do I use those weaknesses for, rather than, oh, what do I do about the next 70 blades that I get spammed at? I hope that is what happens. That might be too optimistic, but guess what? It's a buff to a problem that's needed something, so I'm very excited to see that too. All in all, y'all, this is an update that we've needed for a very, very long time. I wish that this update had come sooner. The drain nerf, the blade and trap counter buff. The fact that we're here just means that maybe we'll have the most playable meta that we've had in a long, long time. And maybe it's just time to get optimistic again. That might be me saying a lot. We'll see what the next broken nonsense is. There's still all kinds of cards that do way crazy damage per pip. There's still an elo system that I would argue is one of the most frustrating experiences I've ever seen. And even after teasing all of these things about tournaments, we've still yet to see them. So there's still a lot to expect in terms of PvP changes. But I do think this is a much, much needed break from the nonsense so that we can actually like play PvP and enjoy it in the meantime. Let me know what you guys think of these changes. I had to make a video on this because it's kind of like breaking news. TLDR, if you only PvE, this shouldn't really affect you almost at all. But if you've been thinking about PvPing and you've been scared by all the broken nonsense, it's just a lot less broken in this update, which should be amazing. I look forward to reading all of y'all's comments on this video, especially drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub if you're new, and if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome. See y'all soon. And yeah.